Welcome back, friends. It's the second Sunday of Advent, and we're back amongst the farm machinery and wildlife in Dorset. It instantly makes me feel happy being in places like this on farm tracks and bridleways, and even more so when I'm heading to not one church but 3 churches today, if we can. The first of those is St. Lawrence's in Puddle, another strange Dorset village name which sounds like something Thomas Hardy might have created. In fact, this is his neck of the woods. Puddle comes from the name of an early owner of the village, actually, Affith, who is recorded in 987 AD as giving the land to Cerne Abbey. And the second part of the name, Puddle, refers to the river. There's a funny legend, which is that the Victorians changed the name of the river from Piddle to Puddle, and you can imagine why. But this village was owned by successive families. After the religious house of Cerne Abbey, it passed to the Lawrence family, and then the Framptons, and finally to Sir Ernest Debenham. And after he died in the 1950s, it was sold in much smaller lots. But the church, which is just coming into view, is the result of the custodianship of that religious house and those 3 families over the course of nearly 1,000 years. St. Lawrence's is one of the few churches I visit to still hold services almost every Sunday. Just before we arrived, the parishioners were busy setting up the Advent decorations, and the village itself is quiet and peaceful. Farm machinery hums in the background, and the river runs gently past the churchyard. Even on this bleak, overcast December morning, Puddle is quaint and inviting. Welcome inside. There is a warmth about this church. The lights are on. It has the feeling of a building which is well looked after by the community, which it certainly is. I notice immediately that staircase to nowhere. And to its left, a very ornate pulpit. This was made around 1547, and you know how I know that? Because it's in a similar style to the pews. And look at this. It says here, "These seats were made in the year of our Lord God, 1547. Now, I'm moving fast because it's December and I'm cold, but also because I find this church rather exciting. Up here in the chancel, we see a memorial to Edward Lawrence. The Lawrences were the first family to own this estate after the dissolution of the monasteries. And there is a curious link between the Lawrence family and the Washington family, and famously George Washington, the first president of the United States. His mother was from the Lawrence family. Now, the family tree has boggled my mind, so if there is somebody who has a vast knowledge of American presidential history, perhaps they could clarify for me the link between the Lawrence family and the Washington family. I'd love to be the man with all the answers, but sometimes I need your help. But anyhow, The family crest of the Lawrence family certainly does resemble the Stars and Stripes. And on that note, friends, it must be time to make our way to the back of the church to investigate the pipe organ. Right. While Sophia makes the coffee, I'm going to take a look at this church organ, which looks to be a very typical village church organ. One thing I notice immediately actually is that this organ has a concave pedal board rather than a straight one, or indeed no pedal board at all. It's actually quite rare for a village church organ to have a full-size pedal board. But the advantage of that is that you can play all kinds of different organ repertoire much more easily on an instrument like this one. As usual, the pipes just above the facade are dummy pipes, and sitting at the console it becomes apparent that this is probably a one manual instrument. Here we are, friends, at the console of another village church organ, and could there be any more contrast compared to last week's cathedral organ at Wells? But this one, in my view, is just as charming in its own special way. I enjoy all parts of filming these videos, but most of all showing you the church organs, and this is an instrument I've never seen before. I've never lifted the lid of the case. So I don't know what kind of music this organ will be able to play. But let's find out. So we carefully remove the cover and we find the nameplate of Bevington and Sons in London. I've played two Bevington organs in the past. One of them was at All Saints Church in Martin in a video called Bark to Basics, which was my first ever proper organ road trip on YouTube. And the second Bevington organ I've played was at Rockbourne Church about this time last year. These are really well-built instruments. They usually have one keyboard in village churches and a fairly small selection of stops, but all of the sounds are of really good quality. And I hope that's the case here. And as the blower hums into life, we can see what kind of sounds we have here. Organs almost always have an open diapason stop. It's the best organ stop because if an organ hasn't been tuned for a long time, that's the one you want to use because it stays in tune best. In fact, the entire organ is usually tuned against the principal, which is a higher version of an open diapason. So we have open diapason and principal, perfect for playing hymns. There was a slight delay there between my second and third verse. That's because I'm still getting used to the geography of this organ. Organists don't talk much about the time required to prepare on a particular instrument, maybe for a funeral or a wedding or a Sunday service. But a considerable part of playing the church organ is getting used to the specific instrument which you're playing, because all organs are different. And I think organists should talk about that more often, actually. The biggest problem with musicians, in my opinion, is that they try so hard to make what they're doing look effortless that people think it actually is. And as a result of that, I don't think musicians, and particularly organists, get the respect that they deserve for the work that they're doing sometimes. But in the case of an instrument like this one, if you came into practice, you'd need to spend a lot of time listening out to the sounds to see what's in tune, to see what works well with another stop. Because organs suffer from changes in temperature and dampness, and they can't really be tuned as often as, say, a guitar, of course. And as a result of that, you have to work with various issues with the instrument when you're playing it. I'm actually wearing earplugs because this is a very bold sound from up here in this gallery. It's a much more subtle tone down in the nave. I actually lost part of my hearing from accompanying a flautist once, and I've always remembered to wear the earplugs ever since. So I mentioned finding music which is appropriate to a particular instrument. And the best composer for organs like this one has to be J.S. Bach. The music is so consistently beautiful that it's almost as if it's a product of nature itself. And because of that, an instrument in any kind of condition can make Bach's music sound beautiful. And the first place I turn with Bach in Advent is to the little organ book, and the first piece, Nun komm der Heiden Heiland, which means come, Saviour of the heathens. And the first organ stop which I turn to is the open diapason. For this piece we need to couple the manuals to the pedals by way of a little pedal coupler down underneath the organ. And we also need to draw the stop diapason, which is specifically for the bass end, just to bolster the pedal department. It's funny playing pieces like that on instruments like this one, because of course Bach never would have envisaged an instrument like this here in England playing his music. But you have to make certain adjustments, because these organs were really designed for playing hymns, and in Bach's music sometimes the hands and the feet coincide. That's because on the big Bachian organs they would have been completely different departments. The pedal would have been separate to the hands. Whereas here, because everything is linked together, sometimes you'll play a note on the pedals which draws it straight down on the manuals, so you almost have to repeat the note to get the same kind of effect. That's just another part of the flexibility of being a church organist. So this organ copes very well with both hymns and pieces of music by J.S. Bach. There's one set of stops that I'm slightly unfair on when I'm demonstrating these instruments, because you rarely get to hear them, and those are the quietest sounds. Why do I not use the quietest sounds? Well, it's because usually they are slightly overpowered by the organ blower. That makes them much harder to record, and because of that, sometimes it's easier to use the audio from the phone actually, rather than the microphone, which is down in the church. The quietest sounds are usually the dulciana and the flutes. Dulciana means sweet, and it certainly is. Let's add the Clarabella. Es ist ein Ros entsprungen by Johannes Brahms. That's quite a sad piece of music because it was one of the last that he ever wrote. And it's specifically written for Advent. Of course, it's based on the hymn I played to you at the beginning. It's quite a difficult piece to play because there are lots of large jumps in the left hand of more than an octave, which are quite difficult to do on a pipe organ. You will have also heard that there was lots of sounds of the keyboard over the top of the pipes. That's why it can be tricky to play music on the quietest stops, because you hear lots of gentle clatters as well as the music from the pipes themselves. Part 1 of our musical journey in Dorset comes to its close. I have a confession to make, friends, at this point. We didn't get round to the second church, only the third. And I prioritised the third one because I knew that you would absolutely love it because of its historical significance and because it looks magnificently beautiful. So, I'm sorry to Turner's Puddle. That church will have to wait till another video. It's a very sad church actually because it appears to be redundant, but I found so little about who looked after it online. I think I'm just going to have to go and look for myself, and I will certainly be going back. It's just further down the river. I just want to talk briefly though, before we reach the final part of this journey, about the difference between playing a village church organ and a cathedral organ. You'll remember last week's video came from Wells Cathedral. Good fun. Let me ask you, as organists or non-organists, is it easier to play a cathedral organ or a village church organ? One is much larger than the other. One has many more sounds, many more keyboards. It's rather scary for some people playing in a huge building. Whereas a village church, just one keyboard, a few stops, quiet location, quieter organ. Which one's easiest to play? Well, you'll be surprised. I tell you with absolute certainty, it's far easier to play a cathedral organ. A cathedral organ is set up a bit like this lovely chair that I'm sat on right now. Everything is exactly where it needs to be. Very comfortable. It creaks a little bit, but the armrests have been neatly worn down over the years because they're in just the right place. And I would say the position was perfect. And the same principles apply in cathedral organ lofts. Everything is very ergonomic. The bench is adjustable. The pedal board is large and concave so that it's comfortable for your feet. The pedals themselves are large enough to play in shoes. But most of all, the organ has no resistance on the keys. You don't get tired playing it. Do you remember my attempts to play Vidor at Donhead St Andrew? And I failed because of the heavy action. It was causing my fingers to go almost numb. Whereas in a cathedral, a piece like Vidor's Toccata is much easier because there's generally what you'd call an electric action. So pressing a key is really a switch that allows air to enter the pipes. It's the difference between a car with powered steering and one without. Village church organs, much harder to record. And that's part of the reason why we didn't have time to visit Turner's Puddle. But before we reach the final part of our story, I must make you aware that these tours of village churches are not funded by the churches. They are funded by me. Even at Wells Cathedral last week, I was not paid a fee. I played there for free. The only person who funded everything was me. So I'd just like to say, because it's very important, that if you're enjoying these tours from the comfort of your homes, wherever you are, I would be really grateful if you might consider donating to support my work. The best way of doing that is using PayPal. And if you look underneath this video, you'll find that funny mixture of letters and numbers. and that's the PayPal link which takes you to the Salisbury Organist donations page. And if you'd like to help support my work, you can leave a small donation and I would be supremely grateful. It's really instrumental in me keeping these trips going. And you know, I would love to travel just a little bit further and show you some gems of the English countryside if I can. But for now, let's finish with one of those gems in the final part of today's story. Welcome back, everyone. We are racing against the sun to reach one of the most remote chapels in Dorset. In fact, in the entire country. You will be amazed when you see this. On one side, we have the gently setting sun, almost ethereal, and on the left, the endless sea. And right in the centre of the two of them is the Coast Guard station and St. Aldhelm's Chapel, almost on the edge of the cliffs. There is a remarkably sad story, or should I say legend, behind this chapel. A father was watching his newlywed daughter and her groom taking to the seas to their new home along the cliffs, when suddenly a storm struck their vessel and all hands were lost. That's how the story goes. And the father had this chapel built on the edge of the cliffs, to help stop anybody else suffering the same fate. The longevity of these buildings is just incredible, isn't it? The heritage that we have here in England of religious buildings. Although it's not certain whether this was ever intended as a chapel at all. The best word I can use to describe it is mysterious. Nobody really knows. Shrouded in legend and myth. There is nothing so awe-inspiring as a view. There's no technology involved in a view. There's nothing modern about a view. It's completely timeless. But it's always exciting and beautiful and emotional. In fact, it brings to mind a section from a poem by William Wordsworth. I have learnt to look on nature, not in the hour of thoughtless youth, but hearing oftentimes the still, sad music of humanity, not harsh or grating, but with ample power to chasten and subdue. loved to have seen the second church that we'd planned today. It was a redundant church, but it didn't seem to be under the care of anyone. Not the church's conservation trust, or the Friends of Friendless Churches. It seemed to stand completely alone, and that was why I was interested in seeing it. But that'll have to be a story for another time. The shades are just magnificent. Something only a great painter could illustrate. The best paintings are the ones where they don't give all of the detail, only a suggestion. They leave the rest to the imagination. It's the same with music, actually. I can't stand perfection in music. We might think it's best, but when we need music most, you'll find that it's the imperfections where all of the comfort and the power lie in music. As musicians, we often can't cope with imperfection, but I'm fed up of hearing performances with all the right notes and where everything is in tune. Humans are not perfect, so why should music be? At last reaching the final stage of the journey, I'm feeling a sense of responsibility to reach this chapel, despite the impending darkness. And here we are at last, arriving at one of the loneliest chapels in England. One window lights the place. A chapel, a lighthouse, an enigma. St. Aldhelm's has stood here on the cliffs for perhaps 900 years, but its story remains a mystery. The place is far too dark and damp for any kind of tour, but the pews and the shadowy dates scratched in its central column tell of the ghosts who have been here before. This is Norman architecture at its most primitive. No decoration, and only one slit to save this space from utter blackness. If it really started out as a chapel, it's the only one in England with no east wall, since the corners mark out the points of a compass. We can't help but be moved by it. The wildness of the setting, the simple silhouette against the evening sky, and the tranquility. Facts, dates, and answers become irrelevant. Simply, the survival of this building amidst the destructive power of nature and humanity, is enough meaning for me. It's strange going to churches like that where there is no organ, because it means I can't perform in the building very easily, and I certainly couldn't bring that harmonium 1.5 miles to the cliffs to perform. But in those situations, you often find you turn to something more otherworldly, actually, which for me is the synthesizer. The synthesizer is an introvert's musical sound world. I remember being 13 years old and trying to teach myself the keyboard, and the synthesizer was the very best instrument because you could put the headphones on and sit in your bedroom playing the sounds that you like to hear most, and you know that nobody can hear them and judge them. Complete isolation, and I still use the synthesizer to this day and I love it. That piece that you heard in the background was something I wrote called Church Bells, and it's really useful for the most mysterious buildings. But as we return to the church organ, I would like to finish with a piece for Advent. My hair seems to grow very fast, and I look round and find that there's twice as much hair as there was yesterday. And that is the case in this recording, I'm afraid. But this is Vac It Auf, a lovely piece for Advent by J.S. Bach. I hope you enjoy it, and I can't wait to see you next time. Who knows where we'll be. Cheerio.